called lots of stuff. Yeah, I've done a lot of deed. I've had it rough and tough. You'll know I've smoked a lot of weed. Mellow, don't you know? Well, I've learned a thing or two, like when and where I should go to, what I should or shouldn't do. I've been left alone, no company, but that's alright with me, 'cause I'm big and ugly. I'm big and ugly. I'd like to let it grow, you know I'm talking about my beard. I'll have you all know that I know sometimes it might look weird, but I got a friend upstairs whom I'll keep confiding in. I know he's there 'cause when I knock he always lets me in. Brings me peace with what it is and what is not for me. To accept what I see, they're looking back at me as big and ugly. Big and ugly. I could have been small and cute and play a flute like a dream, or sing like an angel, maybe play ukulele. But I got to work with my hands and keep dragging it along. Banging on that old guitar, sometimes I'll write a song. I lose a few friends, so it seems I got no enemies. What you get is what you see, that's how it is with me, 'cause I'm big and ugly. I'm big and ugly. Big and ugly.
Hey, welcome back to the Big Uglies. I am Carl Spitali. With me always is my Hulk host. Hello.
Did you say
Josh Denny.
Hulk host?
Well, you're wearing a big Incredible Hulk.
Incredible Hulk colors today?
Incredible Hulk.
Yeah. By the way, can I get a slight round of applause for that flawless intro production?
We weren't going to mention it.
I know, but
it's got to be part of the show now.
No,
they got to think we have a Jamie.
I gotta take credit.
I can't not
take credit.
God,
you know why? Because I used to suck. I used to be real shitty at it, and now I'm trying to get.
But people will notice.
I'm trying to get the message out there, and I'm trying to memory hold that I used to suck at getting the show online. And I want people to think that I've always been good, and like the Southern Border, okay? Like just like the DNC we've been watching.
The Southern Border.
You're just supposed to forget how bad it's been, and we're going forward, okay? In the way that I produce the show, we're going forward, and it's all
unburdened by
all
what
good.
Has been.
We are unburdened. It's what can be unburdened by what has been.
Mm.
Yes, Carl Spitali.
And what's has been is, speaking of has-beens, did you watch the DNC last night?
I did, unfortunately. It was a real, you were telling me it's a real who's who?
Yeah. Dude, they fucking, just from a comedic standpoint, if you bring out comedians and they're not funny.
Yeah. I'm listening.
Like, why are they there? Like, standing at a podium and talking and not doing time at all.
Yeah.
You're just like, That made me go, oh yeah, I forgot D.L. Hughley's not funny.
No, I never forgot. I've never forgotten it.
Like I just don't pay attention to him, but it's just like, oh yeah, because he's the original king of comedy, one of these things. And then you go, oh yeah, he was the worst one.
Yeah.
It was like all he did was crowd work in that fucking special. And then like he lived off that forever. Original king of comedy.
Yeah.
I've never seen another piece of material of his that I was like, bro, do you see that one DL joke?
Yeah, I mean, even Marlon Wayans had like, wow, this one's actually really good.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Marlon
Like,
Wayans,
Nick Cannon had one that was really good.
I saw Marlon Wayans do a bit about Audi belly buttons. It was so fucking funny.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen Marlon kill. I've seen Marlon kill in person.
Yeah, I saw him in West Palm do it.
I feel like he has a. I feel like his specials have not done him justice. Like,
I think he cuts out. He cuts out the things that if you saw him live, you'd be like, dude, leave that. That's hilarious.
Yeah,
Keep leaning in. And he'll be like, I will cut it. It's too like, it's almost like he wants to take himself too serious.
Right.
But yeah, DL was up there.
Perfect place to have a guy who takes himself too serious is the DNC.
But dude, it's so embarrassing. Is that not embarrassing?
Did it not feel like a funeral where it was just like, oh, now we got to hear this guy give his fucking 4 minutes about?
But it was like a long ass comedy show where they just keep bringing out comics, and it's like a shitty. This booker didn't know what he was doing, so he just put up all on the lineup so they can keep collecting cash.
Yeah.
It's like, no, the show's still going, man. Come on.
Yeah.
We got seats right here.
Yeah.
And he's like janky ass promoters still taking money. It's like, dude, DL got up there and was like, you know, I used to spew misinformation about Kamala. And then I did my research. And I'm like, oh man, he did research. And he revealed that his research was going to her house, her putting her hand on his shoulder and said, you need to do some research. So I did. And I'm like, that's it?
It reminds me of the Tyler Fisher thing he did on TikTok when he was doing Fauci during the pandemic, and he just kept finding hundreds and he's stuffing cash. And he's like, actually, you need 2, 3, 4 boosters. And then even if with the social distance, you still.
Exactly. And he was just like, so I did my research, y'all. I was like, what was the research? Did they just write research in the fucking memo of the check?
Yeah.
Like, it was so I just want to know, like, how are you not embarrassed by that?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, comedians are supposed to take down those in power, regardless of party affiliation, right? That's why I got so mad at like leftist shows and shit. Like when I really made the snap from being a fucking, you know,
libertarian,
liberal, fucking definitely left-leaning. So it was John Oliver's Kavanaugh episode.
Right.
I snapped like that. I was watching on the couch. I was like, this is going to be hilarious. And I was like, I watched that hearing. That's not what happened at all.
Right.
What are you talking about? Yeah. And then that's when I was like, oh, dude, it's just, how dare this foreign fuck try and tell me what it's like to be in American high school back then? Or like, and I was like, what the fuck is this guy? And that's when I realized, I was like, oh shit, I've been the sucker.
So like was that like ground zero for your, and I'll use this, for your transition from the left? Like, was that when you started to feel the Kavanaugh thing?
That's when I was like, oh, they left me.
Yeah.
That's when I was like, oh, dude, no. This is a horrible fucking take. Why are you trying to fucking humiliate this dude? Because he didn't remember some shit that probably didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there was a series of them.
And any white man in power, they called a rapist.
Yeah.
And then I was like, cool, but when are you guys going to take down Obama?
Mm-hmm.
When are you guys going to take down, like, the whole time I was like, never had they ever said anything bad about Obama, because I'm thinking about this like secondhand.
Well,
like,
and even like
back in my head,
unconstitutional drone strikes, the stuff in the Middle East. I mean, there's a lot of there to.
All they ever say is he never had a scandal.
Yeah, which was like, well, it's because you never tabled one. It's like pretty easy.
But you never pressured him.
Right. That's my point. Yeah, for me, I feel like my transition to the right was, I think a little bit more gradual. You know, I talk about the conversation with Adam Yenzer when he kind of converted me to having a less libertarian view on abortion and to now being like a staunch pro-life person.
You guys both switched me on that.
Yeah, I mean, and it just goes to the credibility of the position, right? Of just having it from a legal sort of constitutional perspective. But the reason I think talking about these sort of political transitions is important today, because unlike most of our shows where it's you and I rambling and yelling at each other for 2 hours, we have a guest today, which is somebody who can speak to transitions, I think both political and personal. Maia Poet, thanks for joining us, Maia.
Thanks so much for having me.
I met you on Sunday. We were both in Brandon Strzok's invite. I guess it's not his space, but he was invited to speak to some transgender folks about his. It was weird because it was sort of like it almost felt like a organized ambush. Is that how you felt about it? Because it was like the terms are you will come into our space and we will assault you with questions and you will be allowed to speak for a limited amount of time without any support from your supporters, who are vast and many. I mean, I don't know. What was your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed very much like the way you described, like some kind of a political ambush. And the truth is that the ideas of gender ideology are actually just so incredibly bad. Like the idea that a man can be a woman because he thinks he's a woman. Those ideas are so bad that they only function when you enforce them with censorship. It's not as if these ideas can actually win out in a marketplace of ideas, because they are so bad, and anybody with just, a few brain cells can basically surmise that, biological sex is immutable. And so in order to enforce these false ideas about sex and gender, you have to use communist style suppression. You can't just allow a debate to occur, because the ideas of gender ideology lose every single time.
It's funny that you said, so Maia, so we had these like wake up moments for us about entertainment and like our favorite people and the shows that we watch. They're like, oh shit, they've been sort of like, I've been the sucker. When did you have this transition ideology, gender, like wake up that, oh shit, they're lying to me, this is bullshit? Like, when was your like wake up call?
So I think my wake up call, so I was trans identified from the age of 12 until the age of 24. I'm now 25. So that was half of my life.
12?
Yeah. And I started in 2012. So far before it was cool. I was really a pioneer or an early adopter of this belief system. And I'd say
but it was during the Obama administration. I will point that out.
Yes.
Okay.
It would have been during that time. Yeah. I would say that my wake up point really, I mean, it was quite long actually, but I'd say that the catalyst for me reconsidering this life path that I'd chosen for myself was really, during May of 2021, when I lived through my first war in Israel. I was, getting ready with my girlfriend to go to some kind of a concert, and we were just, about to head out the door, and we heard a siren. And so I look at her and I'm like, what the hell is this? And she's like, they're launching rockets at us. And I'm like, well, aren't we supposed to do something? And then she tells me, she's like, yeah, we need to go to a bomb shelter. And I look at her and I'm like, well, where is the bomb shelter? She's like, I don't know, I'm new to this neighborhood. So we pack up the two cats and, we run to the lowest level of the apartment complex, because you're just much less likely to get hit by a rocket when you're lower level as opposed to on the higher level. And we did that until we could figure out where the bomb shelter was. And so every single time
I don't go to West Hollywood, by the way. It's way much more likely getting hit by a rocket over there than up in the valley where we live.
Yeah, but that's only from the go-go dancers.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's
sorry. Yeah,
I never considered that.
We're gonna do that a lot.
Story.
We're gonna do that a lot.
It's the closest thing we have to compare it to, right? Because we have the privilege of never having, lived in a war zone. Yeah.
Period. I mean, neither of us have lived in the south side of Chicago. I used to live in North Philly. That was close.
Yeah.
When I lived in East Hollywood, the MS-13 dudes, I would have to like go down to my car and be like, hey, man, don't steal my shit.
Yeah,
right?
Talk about privilege, right? That's the ultimate privilege.
That's the closest like war zone I've ever lived in. So when you find the bomb shelter and you get away with your girlfriend, what happened?
So I was kind of in the process of running in between bomb shelters, and there's a certain protocol for how many minutes you're supposed to wait after you hear the siren and then the explosion of the interception before you leave the bomb shelter. So we were doing that, and it was 11 days of hell. And I didn't shower for 11 days. I just didn't, because I was worried that I would be, taking a shower and that I'd hear a siren and have to wrap a towel around myself and just run to the bomb shelter with soap in my hair. So I just didn't shower for 11 days. And really the only thing that I did to take my mind off of this like existential dread was just, surfing social media endlessly. And I saw my lefty American friends basically, justifying that Israelis should have to live under rocket fire and justifying every single action done by the terrorist group Hamas, because they held this, allegedly pro-Palestinian position, and they basically said that these rockets being launched at Israeli civilians is what's going to liberate Palestine. And I basically thought, well, I know these kids from high school debate, so surely if I come up with like a logically reasoned argument backed up with sources that my friends can fact check if they don't believe me, that they will, include my arguments within their logical calculus. And I was essentially trying to argue that, look, even if you don't care about the Jews, which I already knew they didn't, you shouldn't support Hamas because of what they're doing to the Palestinians. I mean, when they're not hell-bent on destroying Israel or destroying, Jews and then moving on to the West, as is their stated goal, in establishing an Islamic caliphate, they are hell-bent on making the lives of Palestinians absolutely miserable. So you shouldn't support Hamas because, they're jihadis. Jihadis don't care about borders. They don't want to establish a sovereign Palestinian state. Jihadis hate borders. They want to establish their Islamic caliphate. So I was trying to get this through to my friends. And, what ended up happening is, for a group that cares so much about lived experience, like they certainly didn't care about mine.
They dismissed yours real quick, didn't they?
Real quick from their comfortable couches in California as I was running from rockets. They were like yelling names at me. They were calling me like a colonizer and a settler sympathizer. And so from that moment, like two major things happened. The first of which is that I became really disillusioned with the Western left because I realized that even the smartest people who I had known who subscribed to these ideologies, they weren't actually thinking logically. They were just purely ideological. So that was one thing that happened, that disillusionment. But then the second thing, and this is really important, is that because I was doing so much research in preparation to make these arguments, and I was doing research that could be classified as, pro-Israel or anti-Hamas, the algorithm started to feed me a lot more right-wing content because apparently the pro-Israel position is on the right-wing side of the. At that point,
isn't that crazy? Like, when did that happen? Isn't that just wild that those two things converged at some point recently?
Well, what's interesting is that like anti-Semitism is like the ultimate mind virus because it has existed, both on the left and on the right. It has existed in secular societies and in religious societies, in Christian societies and in Muslim societies. It's existed for a couple thousand years. And so, it's the ultimate shape-shifting mind virus that
She said it, not me.
She said shapeshifters.
Saying they shapeshifted in every society ever?
What you're saying is everyone knows how bad it is. No, I'm kidding. We're kidding. No, I mean,
so you're saying it's you guys.
What's interesting too about, you talking about Hamas and everything. You and I didn't get into this thing that we have in common, but so some of the viewers know this, but my girlfriend is Middle Eastern. She's not Muslim. She's Baha'i. And her grandfather was a soldier in the Shah's army. And so, they were sent to, they were ordered to be executed because they were on the wrong side during the Iranian Revolution. And listening to her grandmother talk about Islam, over the dinner table one night completely changed my idea about the
religion of peace.
Yeah. And it's just like that, she was like, listen, there just is no redeeming quality about, Islam, and particularly that section of radical Islam. And generally what you find, and I think this is interesting and I'd like your take on it. Generally what you find is the people who will try to sell you that Islam is a religion of peace aren't really doing the Islam. And and I make the same argument when people try to say that there's this cabal of evil Jewish people controlling liberalism in America. And it's like, well, generally you'll find out that those people really aren't doing the Talmud and they're not doing Judaism. They're liberal, elitist atheists who are Jews in name only, who really don't believe in anything other than amassing personal wealth and influence. And that's
pathological altruism.
Right. Yeah. So I think I went through a similar story of discovery of realizing like, oh, wow, they're really, if you really look into those that practice the tenets of Islam, as you said, like the agenda is not to have their own sovereign state and live and let live under any circumstance. It's about first defeating Israel and then destroying the West. And I just don't see, it's insane to me that we have American citizens who are so tone deaf to that they're willing to jump in and pretend like they've almost gotten so used to gaslighting reality that they're supporting Hamas in spite of that being the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the truth is that like a lot of our higher education institutions at this point are basically just like little jihadi training factories. I mean, that's the way it seems. Like,
yeah,
the pro-Palestinian position is the only acceptable position for somebody to hold in a lot of these institutions. And so it's, it just be there. I mean, we all know that these higher education institutions are no longer the bastions of sort of, charitable academia or, of any kind of free thought.
Why do you think that is? Why? Like, I have this theory, right? That a lot of LGBT people hate Christians, and they're obsessed with hating Christians because it reminds them of their parents or whoever told them or acted bigoted towards them or whatever. So their vendetta is with Christians. And I have this belief that in these institutions, the religion of peace and is provided to them as seen as some subject they could study, but they also hate Christians. And they all also hate white men or white oppressors and all that. And it is this like thing that they could cling to and support without going, well, I'm not religious and they should have their own religious freedom and these people are oppressed. And then you ask them, he's like, yeah, but how come you don't feel that way about like persecuted Christians? And they will literally flip like a 180 and go, nobody persecutes Christians. No, but they don't mock any other religion they don't mock Jews and they don't mock Muslims at the Olympics or even in entertainment. Like there's not a single show on TV that mocks Muslims, right? But there's at least 3 horror movies that came out in the last year that were based in Catholicism or Christianity that mocked stuff, and they have like atheistic views. Every podunk country bumpkin redneck scene that we see in a show, they're like Christian fundamentalists. Even The Boys makes fun of like anybody who believes that is like some Christian. Like, why
they all have a Southern accent and talk about Jesus?
It's like, why do you think that is, that the Christian right is the only ones that support Israel, and that our higher institutions have this Islam is good, Christianity is bad sort of, I don't know, truce or deal?
But just to clarify your position, you think that's more about race than it is about
in both
protecting
aspects.
Religious
in both
beliefs?
aspects.
Okay, yeah.
I think they see it as Christianity as a white oppressive religion, and that Islam is the religion of brown people in the desert. And then I literally think that's what they believe.
What it boils down
and like
to.
where their altruistic bullshit comes from.
Well, and I agree with you on that. Real quick before you reply, Maya, I'll just say one of my experiences was I went to this AT&T Shape event in Hollywood, which was like an all-black entertainer event. And I remember there was a moment where people...
Well, it wasn't an exercise event.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It wasn't a Shape Up event, in case you couldn't tell by looking at me. I wasn't... by the way, I asked several times to ensure I wasn't getting...
Why do you keep calling it Shape? Yeah. I'm not in shape.
Do not trick me into going to this thing. But anyway, but it was P. Diddy, Issa Rae, and the head of DirecTV AT&T on stage. And Issa Rae gave this speech, this impassioned speech of like, Hollywood won't be right until all the straight white men die off in this industry. And I remember there was this uproarious applause. And I remember turning to my girlfriend and I go, everyone knows she's talking about Jews, right? Like this is like a Hitler level speech, and everyone's just cheering for it as if this desire to destroy straight white men wasn't going to start with the Jews. And I felt like so many, like I'm running into this now in LA, where I have friends that have been longtime Democrats who are now in this moral conundrum of like, oh wait, I'm now in the political party that hates Jews, and here I am, like Mr. Western straight white guy going, yeah, did you not think that the exodus of white people wasn't going to start with Jews?
Yeah, it's a funny thing too. They say that about entertainment, and like I said, you can't name an A-list conservative outside of Mel Gibson.
No, I can. Chris Pratt.
Okay, but
there are a lot of people who will literally be like, despite what he believes, and it's like he's never not given like an impassioned,
about
speech
Jesus.
about Jesus
right.
and potential and
but so
the
when,
beauty of
so
humanity.
when they go Oscar's so white, this and that, I go, who do you think is running this place and signing checks? You're talking about white Jews.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so when you're saying we need to replace all that, I was like, dude, it ain't conservative Christians running fucking HBO. It ain't fucking right. And it's not conservative Christians running fucking Viacom and every other thing that they have a gripe with, that they go, they control them. Who do you think makes blacks in the music industry? It's the white man. I go, again, you're talking about Jews. So what are you saying really?
Right.
Like, that's why Nick Cannon got in trouble, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. But he tried to not say Jews. He just said like white people.
So-called Jews. That's what he called them.
White people's lack of melanin makes them insidious.
But he called modern day Jews not real Israelites, and that they were so-called.
Oh yeah.
It
I'm familiar with that argument.
Yeah, the black Israelite type stuff.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
I look at her face like lit up for that shit. She was like, yeah, I know those people. They're on the FBI list. It's really big in Florida. I don't know why it's massive in Florida. It's a huge like movement. I don't know. But do you is your experience with like this, and I'll get back to like the ideological thing, because I really want to know when or why this like association with like brown people in the desert bad, Jews are white, or I mean they're good, Jews are white, they're bad, they're oppressors, they're this. It was just like you had rockets flying at your fucking head from the brown people. Did you stop and go, oh man, I think they're making a mistake, we should go talk to them?
Well, so I mean, I would say that, yeah, there's the reason why higher academia is going to hell at the moment is because over the last several decades, there has been an encroachment of all kinds of critical theory ideas within academia. And I mean, we can talk, critical race theory, queer theory. These are two very insidious ideas that basically chip away at the notion that the West is like a good civilization that needs to be sort of, protected or replicated, or like it's just, the thing is that within academia, it makes sense that there would be so many thought experiments, because that's when you get people who like to think, and who are very good at argumentation, it makes sense why so many smart people get sucked into these bad ideas, because instead of using the common sense brain where you're kind of trying to see what the logical extension of any of these critical theory ideas are, you're using like this complex reasoning type of stuff, and people who are very smart can very easily reason themselves into really bad and nonsensical ideas.
Right. And the ability to rationalize it, and this goes back to the pro-choice, pro-life thing, which Josh got into yesterday with all these people, is that the ability to rationalize is what will allow an immoral act to be accepted, right? That's it. The only modern acceptance of things we would thought were awful is from this over rationalization about things, where you can be like, I mean, yeah, that's wrong, but, and they start doing this whole like, everybody with a brain calls it mental gymnastics, right? And they start doing this whole loop around thing. And when we get back to the base, that's why, Josh, and he mentioned Adam Yenzer, a fellow comic conservative that we know, had a great, compelling argument for pro-life, whereas before I was like, hey, do your own thing. As long as the government isn't paying for it or whatever, it should be fine. I don't know why this is an issue. And then I was like, I listened to Josh, and then I was like, oh, this is like not only is it wrong, then I looked into the fact that no, our government has been funding it. So when it comes to like the gender ideology,
well, yeah, hold on. Well, real quick before you pivot to that, I wanted to say, like, yeah, on that note with the abortion thing, like the line that really changed my thinking, and I think Carl's too, was when it was framed as sort of a more of a moral question, and I think this is relevant getting into the trans conversation with you, because you brought up the morality of like doing it at all, like regardless of personal freedom, what is our sort of agreed upon morality? And that really was the thing that changed my view on abortion, was because regardless of what you think about personal choice or personal freedom,
or legality,
right? It is like, well, what is the purpose of a society? What is the purpose of laws? And what is the purpose of a government? And we don't have to speculate on that with the United States, because we have a document in the Constitution that says our government is being formed to do basically three things: uphold a common welfare, which scholars have ascertained has to be built on an agreed upon baseline morality; protect us from enemies foreign; and settle disputes, right? And so when you think of it that way and you say, okay, if the Constitution grants every person, they don't say human, they don't say fetus, they don't say woman, I'll tell you that. They're not mentioned in the Constitution. Even in the amendment that gives women the right to vote, it doesn't say women. It just says, I guess you can vote regardless of gender or sex. They don't actually even expressly name women in that amendment, but which is funny to me. But in that thing, when you think about, okay, what is the purpose of law? What is the purpose of government? If we can't start from a place where we can recognize that if the Constitution says a person has the right to life, liberty, and property in that order, then what else are we doing? Like it's sort of like, if we can't start from this agreed upon thing, and when you start to make
none of those things are in the Constitution.
What's that?
That's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
No, life, liberty, and property are in the Constitution in that order.
No.
Yeah, reread.
In the original.
No, you're conflating it with the Declaration of Independence.
The property part was changed.
The property part is
pursuit of happiness.
No,
in the Declaration.
The other way around. It was pursuit of happiness in the Declaration. It's property in the Constitution. I just reread it this morning to fight with trolls.
No, but the actual part about the property is a separate.
No,
it's
all in the same amendment. It's all
in the same amendment. It's all in the same sentence.
All in the same sentence of the same amendment.
Okay.
I think it's the 12th. I could be wrong about that.
I'll check that.
But anyway, that being neither here nor there, it just sort of makes this compelling thing of like, should our positions about these things be based on our laws, be based around what the agreed upon common morality is, and then we make exceptions. And the example I always give is like, listen, people are going to murder people regardless of what the law is, because people will break the law, but we don't have the law based off of what could happen. The law is based off what we think is right and what we think is wrong. And obviously we allow exceptions for that, because if somebody has to kill someone in self-defense, we take that into consideration. So that's why
they have a trial.
That's why I look at things like abortion and go, so why is this the one thing that we're trying to build the law around the exceptions and the possibilities? The exceptions or the possibilities, rather than saying the law is this based off of our agreed upon morality, that human life has value, and then we'll deal with the exceptions as they arise. If a woman's life is in danger, obviously. If it's a rape situation, and I think rape should be part of every Plan B, I think Plan B should be part of every rape kit. I think that would just fix the problem right away. It would incentivize and increase reporting. But when you think about these things from a moral perspective, it brings me back to what was really compelling about your discussion about this whole trans debate was, regardless of your perspective on whether it is or isn't, and the identity thing is or isn't personal choice
or legal.
What is the public and government's moral responsibility, and the doctors who conduct these things, what is their responsibility to it? I'd love for you to talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So the way I like to think about, this entire discussion, like, an argument I often come up against is just this basic libertarian argument of like, well, okay, kids shouldn't be able to do this, but if you're over 18, go ahead and do it. I see a few problems with this argument. The first of which is that we know that the human brain is not fully developed at 18. And in fact,
age 22, yeah.
Well, it depends. I mean, usually, so there are a lot of studies that will say 25, but it's not like the moment you turn 25, it's like when you've completed your 25th year. So it's closer to 26, actually. And also, this patient population that presents with gender dysphoria is a notoriously complex patient population. They present with a lot of, other comorbidities, and some common ones are like conditions like ADHD and autism. Both of these conditions are known to slow the prefrontal cortex's full development even further. So even 25 is not adequate for people with more severe ADHD or autism. And so when we know that this is like a condition that comes with all kinds of other comorbidities, we need to really think about, this question of like, 18 is fine. And the other problem I have with this argument is the fact that, none of these treatments, none of these interventions that are done in an attempt to like, quote unquote, change sex or to change the appearance of somebody's primary and secondary sex characteristics, none of these treatments for adults or for children are based upon any high quality evidence. And so like,
So what is the counter when they say like, but studies show, or because the biggest argument was that, or case for this, for especially for kids, is when they would say, would you rather have a dead son or daughter than like a transitioned kid or whatever? Like, and they use that as like, and they try and use these fake studies or whatever. And you're saying there's no actual evidence of this at all.
Yeah, like this, so that suicide claim, that's just pure emotional blackmail. I mean, the study that was used to gather those statistics is just total BS. Like, and I mean, what pains me about this argument is that those aren't the only two options. It's not
Right.
that you could either have like a dead daughter or a living transgender son. Those are not the only two options. And if you plant the idea inside a child's mind that if they don't do this, they're going to commit suicide. I mean, seriously, you're just planting this idea in the mind of a child who otherwise would not have considered it. And frankly, if a child is saying that they are suicidal because their parents aren't affirming them, then that's the priority. The priority is not the affirmation. The priority is to figure out why they're suicidal, because like there's no evidence to suggest that like removing or rearranging people's body parts or disrupting their healthy endocrine system is going to generate any positive long-term outcomes. And in fact, what we know about young people aged, 10 to 24, as per this new German study that came out, is that most of them end up within 5 years of adopting a transgender identity, they end up basically no longer meeting the diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria. And so if we know that like there's a high rate of desistance after 5 years and that the regret post-surgery tends to set in at about 8 years, and none of these studies really do long-term follow-ups. I mean, there are so many problems with all these studies that claim low regret rates, so many problems. I mean, one of the big problems is just the extremely high rate of loss to follow-up. I mean, most studies would consider a 5 to 10% rate of loss to follow-up, meaning that, you have your original patients that you're studying and kind of tracking their life outcomes, and then if you do a study to figure out, whether or not the treatment actually improved this person's quality of life or functionality, you are ideally supposed to retain as many patients as you possibly can, because, but within these studies that claim...
Maia, you brought up a great point about that, where you were just like, think of it like a shitty restaurant. And I don't know if this is exactly how you worded it, but it reminded me of this when you were talking about like people who get these surgeries, if they're unhappy with them, they don't go back to the doctor and go, I want a refund and I am unhappy with the work and the outcome. Like they don't go back to their doctors, and particularly the psych people who are steering them in this direction to say, I think you got it all wrong. It's like the common understanding that most people who have a bad experience with something don't go back to complain. They just don't go back at all.
Man.
Yeah. So our mechanisms by which to gather data are so flawed in this regard. And all of these studies that show like super low regret rates, I mean, we have to figure out, so how are we able to track detransition or regret? In the 80s, they did it by legal documents. So if somebody changed their sex marker once and then changed it back, that's how they would figure out, who detransitioned. But of course, a lot of these people, once they've undergone these surgeries, even if they regret it, they're not going to go through like the hoops to go through the legal system yet again, especially because a lot of them now, pass as members of the opposite sex. And so even if they regret it, they're probably not going to change their documents. And so that's how it used to be tracked, in like the 80s and in some of these earlier studies. But the other problem is that, we have a totally different patient population now than we had back in those days. I mean, most of the transitioners back in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, and, possibly early 2000s, they were adults. And not only were they adults, but they were cognitively mature adults. They weren't legal adults. They were legal adults, but they were, in addition to being legal adults.
Right.
Right. They were mature adults.
When I was a kid, my aunt was a hairdresser and, in Philadelphia. And, my entire exposure as a kid to gay and trans people was through her business, her industry. And there were two trans, male to female transgenders who cut hair in her shop. They were both like over 50, I think, when they made the transition. Yeah. So there was not like you just didn't see this with young people at all. And what I thought was really interesting was, I didn't know this, but you explained to me about the Dutch study. I think I'm saying what it was, but was there a Dutch study or something that basically they wanted the idea to trans kids younger was really just because the passable outcomes were so poor, and it had nothing to do with like what's best psychologically for the kids?
Yeah, exactly. So the Dutch.
What?
Yeah. So I'll go a little bit into the history of gender medicine. So basically, so I'll go back even further than the Dutch, because the first sex change attempt was done in Germany in the 1930s in the Magnus Hirschfeld Institute. And so there were some, one-off experiments, and, what a lot of people don't know is actually the sort of, the history of Nazis doing medical experiments. And so you had a lot of people who were experimenting with the sex change stuff who ended up moving to the concentration camps and doing experiments on Jews. So this is something that very few people know.
I was gonna just about that. So there is a lot of stuff that circles around and goes around that there was during that same time that you brought up the Nazis, that there was this like Jewish transgender center, and that the book burnings and all that was about transgender books and transgender ideology and things like that. Is there any truth to that?
No. The Nazis largely colluded with these types of medical experiments. It's a total myth that somehow the Nazis were targeting, trans folks or whatever for being trans. Like, they were targeting homosexuals, sure, and you had a lot of the entire purpose of these really early transitions was to solve the problem of the quote unquote sexual invert, which was the term for homosexuals before the term homosexual was invented. And in fact, these early sex researchers would photograph, homosexual people, photograph them naked and try to analyze, try to say that these homosexuals were a member of some kind of third sex. And they would look at these men's bodies and they would say, oh, look, his hips are a little bit rounder. And they would basically highly scrutinize the normal bodies of homosexuals. And so the entire, in the beginning,
I got fucking super narrow hips, everybody. Just so you know, I might be fat, but I wear a 32-inch band.
So the entire history of all this stuff, it was aimed at solving the problem of the sexual invert. Okay, then so this was the beginning.
Yeah. It's so very sexy.
Yeah. Look at this man with his round hips.
And we found out that when says younger, it actually has more of a sort of sachet with the hips.
Yeah, that was the thing. Oh, the uniform does not fit around your bulbous hips, huh? Who's the furnace with him?
And so anyway, so now let's fast forward to post World War II, because that's when we can attribute, the first wave of the trans social contagion to. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Christine Jorgensen, but basically he was, an American GI.
This was in America?
So he was an American serving in the Second World War, and after his service, he stayed behind in Europe. And he was there for several years. His parents didn't really know why. His name at the time was George Jorgensen. And he wrote to his parents a letter saying that, he had a glandular disorder that now had been fixed. And so now instead of a son, they had a daughter. His loving parents took this letter straight to the tabloids, and it became viral in 1952. I think the headline that everybody saw was like, GI turns into blonde beauty or something like that. So his story started to go viral, 1950 standards, and it had reached some of the most remote corners of the earth. And the endocrinologist who was treating Christine Jorgensen.
I'm sorry, I just got to say, what does going viral in the 50s like that look like? This just in, check out the cock on this bra.
It's totally
I just couldn't get that out of my head.
This is in across the wire now. We got ourselves a big hog man in a wig. It reached all corners of the earth?
I mean, as much as anything could back in those days.
Oh my goodness, when you look at this. Oh my goodness, when you look at this. Yeah. This American, this is what he do. He went to Europe, okay? He had a big cock. He come back with a pussy. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and so what's interesting is that, so basically from the moment that, Christine Jorgensen's story was leaked, a bunch of people from all kinds of different countries started to write letters to the endocrinologist who was treating him. And this endocrinologist was named Christian Hamburger. And that's actually, Christine named himself after this endocrinologist who was treating him. And so what ended up happening was that Christian Hamburger ended up getting somewhere in the realm of 1,117 letters, mostly from men, although from some women, requesting his services. And here's what's really interesting. So Christian Hamburger was very meticulous about categorizing these letters and trying to figure out, the motivations that all of these people had expressed in wanting to quote unquote change sex. And he basically figured out that there were 3 categories of men, dysphoric men, who wanted to change sex. The first of which are those with body dysmorphia. The second of which would be the effeminate homosexuals. And the third of which would be the fetishistic cross-dressers. And so that's really interesting because, in the 80s, Ray Blanchard, a sexologist, condensed this into the 2-type typology of the homosexual transsexual and the autogynephilic transsexual as 2 pathways that men go down, 2 pathways into gender dysphoria that is so severe that one might request a transition. And here's another interesting bit. So while the men existed in 3 main categories, there were, of course, women who also expressed a desire to change sex. But those women actually were a less complicated patient population than the men were. All of the women who wrote to Christian Hamburger, they were all same-sex attracted. They actually had no particular distress around their bodies, but their motivations that they had expressed for wanting to transition were because they wanted to marry their female friend. So they were all lesbians and they wanted to get married. And so this is particularly interesting because now we see.
So it was almost like really as like a societal acceptance loophole more than a true like a calling to identify that way.
Yes, exactly. And so, what we need to understand about the medical ethics, of course, one could imagine that as these treatments were being pioneered, there were medical ethics debates about, cutting into a healthy body. And so the way that these debates were mitigated is that essentially, so there was this Christian hospital in the Netherlands, and, they had basically come to the conclusion that, if the body is the source of suffering for the soul, that it is medically ethical to cut into the body in order to liberate the soul. So that was kind of their rationale. And the reason for this, it's actually not purely a spiritual one. It was also somewhat of a legal one because in Europe, they had already been castrating sex offenders and castrating gay men who wish to be rid of their homosexual tendencies. So that was already chemically and physically.
Castration or physically?
Wow.
Yeah.
Because wasn't Bayer or all these pharma companies, they were Nazi companies that started the chemical castration and stuff back then?
Yeah, probably.
Through Operation Paperclip, we had all the Nazis come over and then the pharma companies came here.
And so what ends up happening is that there's this interplay between Europe and the United States, because in the United States, they deemed it medically unethical to cut into a healthy body. But if a man had already had his testes removed in Europe, where they would do that type of a thing,
He's not a healthy body.
It's not a healthy body. And the United States post World War II had a skilled team of ready plastic surgeons who were, helping to reconstruct people's bodies after war injuries. So the first phase of the treatment was called demasculinization, which would have been the orchiectomy or the removal of the testes. That would be done in Europe. And then the feminization procedure, or, the penile inversion, that would be done in the United States. But and here's what's really interesting.
By the way, we
both have jokes on it.
We're very far away on those. Like, I have a joke in my special, Maya, where I'm just like, what doctors? Like, wrap, no pun intended, wrap that job up, and we're like, I think we did it. Authentic human penis. High
Pop the
fives
champagne, boys. We did it.
Yeah, like, it's just it's, as someone who has one with paperwork, I would just say it's a bad forgery.
Also, Maya, you did go into this grand history of all this. We still would like to hear your own history as well.
Yeah,
share
okay.
More story. Just saying.
So I think where we left off in my story was about the algorithms that started to suggest me right-wing content.
Yes.
After searching the pro-Israel, anti-Hamas stuff.
And where were you at that point in your detransitioning or desisting? Because I know you said you started down that journey as a child. Like, where were you at in terms of your personal ideology?
So I was still trans, but at this point, so what I'm describing now is like the kind of the catalyst, the very beginning of the process of kind of realizing that these ideas are all basically, just based on a stack of lies, essentially. So once I started to become more exposed to this right-wing content, like with the George Floyd protests, Black Lives Matter, in a critical way, I'd started to go down that rabbit hole. And eventually I was exposed to content which critiqued gender ideology, and it started showing, the insanity of the men and women's sports. And eventually, as I went down that rabbit hole, I started to see the stories of detransitioners pop up. And I decided to watch them. And actually, in that beginning stage of watching those videos, those videos actually reaffirmed my trans identity, because all of these women who were detransitioners at that time, they were all like mostly quite feminine and heterosexual. And so I thought, well, yeah, of course a girl like that would regret transition. Like, why would any straight person want to do this? This is something that gay people do so that we don't have to be gay anymore. I mean, so I already, it just reaffirmed for me the idea that I was like the true transsexual. But as I had to deal with these ideas, and I was really like kicking around, the sort of true trans ideological space, and I started to realize that there were a lot of ideological inconsistencies, to the point where I realized that actually, like, trans actually isn't, it certainly isn't some kind of, identity, certainly in the way that being gay or lesbian is, because being trans is an ideology, or it's an identity that's purely predicated upon access to a thriving technomedical complex. You need medical intervention in order to reify this type of an identity. It's not, being trans is not something that you are, it's something that someone does. And so,
yeah, I never thought of it like that, but that's a bar for sure.
Trans is not something you are, it's something somebody does.
Right.
And that's why it's a verb.
That's
why it's a fucking verb.
Yeah, I just want to point out, by the way, that for anybody who tunes in who's not a regular viewer of this show, this does look like a very smart person educating two retarded fucking jocks at a table. Like, we're just sitting there like, no, yeah.
Maya's like, I'm gonna stop you right there. One jock.
Okay. Wow. The fucking body negativity all over here. I don't know, chef.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you were sort of right. Yes, yeah. Hold on. Fly goes jocks plural.
Yeah.
That's fair. That's a fair.
I didn't let it go over my head either, guys.
Hey! I played hockey for a few years in high school, 20-something years ago. We won't count,
bro. Hey. Maya, what was the sport that you saw men competing in that pissed you off the most? Was it wrestling? Was it swimming? Was it boxing? MMA?
Wow, I don't know if this is a question I've ever been asked.
That's why you're on the big uglies.
I think that the first time that I saw American football, on one hand, I found it kind of intriguing, but on the other hand, I just thought like this is a recipe for like lifelong brain damage.
Yes, that's
And then
why
we're just letting kids play.
His name is Carl
It's no
Vitale.
biggie.
You've been talking to him for an hour.
You've been talking to me for an hour. I have it.
Oh, you were a football player?
Yeah. That's my background. When I was 12, I was like playing being a band dork and playing with instruments and stuff. And then everybody in my high school, including my teachers, were like, if you don't play football, you're a faggot.
You should probably explain that you're 6'8".
Yeah, I'm 6'8".
Yeah.
And I just kept growing and growing. I graduated high school, I was like 6'6", 325. So they were like, basically, I grew up in South Florida. So like, if I didn't play football, like that's just how it was. And definitely some sort of brain damage in my brain. Josh reminds me daily.
Yeah, there are these moments where we're also neighbors where we live next to each other. So there'll be days where I'm over his place hanging out, and we'll just be in the middle of a conversation, and the hard drive crashes, and I'm just like, all right, dude, I'm gonna head over, and he's just staring into the TV like Tuesdays with Maury.
Yeah,
and I just gotta go. Oh, eventually he'll come back online, and I'll hear from him in a couple days. Now I don't know if that's the right thing to do as a friend, but I don't know what else there is.
Basically he's saying I just kind of stare for a little bit.
Yeah,
and then.
I also don't know how much of it's the weed and how much of it is the CTE.
I think the weeds.
It's a catalyst.
I think it's helping.
Yeah.
the whatever's going on.
Yeah, I like to think of weed for you as CTE confirmation.
Sorry, I apologize for our behavior.
No, don't.
No, you're all good. You're all good. This is interesting.
I warned her.
Yeah, we warned you.
Yeah, it's all good. It's different, but I'm chilling. Like I'm a pretty chill person at this point in time.
We don't.
I don't know.
I mean, fucking you got shot at with rockets, so
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of fat fucks saying some bad words probably doesn't rattle you.
Not even remotely. No.
Not.
But so I'd say a big turning point, really for me, was October 7th. I was supposed to be at one of the music festivals that got invaded by Hamas.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but my sober driver sort of dropped out at the last minute because, if you've ever tried to plan an event with like 5 people, you know how impossible it is. And so we just kind of kept annoying him because people would come in and drop out. And he was like, look, I need a beer just to deal with you people. I'm not going to be your sober driver. And so, a few days before the event, that whole thing got canceled. And so instead, I decided to do a peace event with Jewish and Arab children. And it was so incredibly optimistic. So I was doing that on October 6th. And we were in a Bedouin village, and Bedouins are nomadic Arabs. And so, we had this event. It was like a birthday party for some of the kids. And, these kids didn't even speak the same language, but yet they played with each other. They were so young that it didn't actually matter. And it was just so incredibly, optimistic. And by the end of it, I was really hopeful that, if we just invest in our kids and don't trust these like leaders who have their grubby, grimy little hands in the weapons trade. And, obviously we can't trust these peace accords that have shown themselves to not work. And we can't trust, any of the terrorist groups in the region, obviously, as negotiating partners. And so, like, if we just invest in our kids on the ground, maybe we'll be able to achieve at least some kind of on the ground peace. And I was just so optimistic. And then on October 7th, I woke up at 8 a.m. to a siren. And at first I thought they were testing the system because everybody's a little bit in denial when that type of thing happens. I mean, I was just at a peace event the day before. How could there be war just a few hours later? Anyways, so
yeah, and when I saw the footage of the concert, stuff, I mean, first of all, thank God you weren't there. But when I saw the body cam footage of the dudes dropping in and like giddy and high-fiving each other over how many Jews they killed, I was just like, there is no rationalization of this fucking ideology or this opinion. Like there's no excuse for that kind of murderous fucking joy. And so I'm like, I get called Zionist all the time by leftists and conservatives who tend to lean more anti-Semitic, but it's like, I have no problem with whatever Israel's retaliation is against that attack. I don't give a shit if they wipe Islam off the face of the earth. And that's, you know, that to me is the most extreme position you can take. But if I were saying anything else, I would be being dishonest. I don't know how you can watch body cam footage of guys like Giddy over murdering innocent people and go like, I bet there's like a perspective here that like makes them right. You know what I mean? There's no empathy
now
for
that
me
we're
in
talking
that regard.
about
You know what I mean?
I mean,
They're freedom fighters, guys. It's okay. They're freedom fighters.
Yeah.
dude,
No.
I saw a video yesterday
Yeah.
of a black dude shooting a girl in front of an apartment building, and they
Is
all
this
like
the Philly one?
filmed
It was like 30 shots or something.
No, there's
Oh.
a dude just standing there. She's arguing with him. And he just pulls out a gun and shoots her. There's a guy like eating a bag of Cheetos right next to it. Doesn't even, and like steps over, and like everybody else ran and stuff. The other dude is just cold. And he's standing there with a gun, and I was just like, make white liberals watch this and go advocate. Okay, what socioeconomic explanation do you have for this?
For this kind of just, you know,
Disregard for human life.
disregard for human life. And this is where I get into, like, you know, when you talk about abortion, like what has been, we can't measure this, but like what has been the existential cost of having such a libertarian pro-choice outlook on abortion for the last 60 years in this country, or however long, 30, 50 years. But it's like the idea that we find ways to rationalize and trivialize human life so much to now you can eat Cheetos and just step over a woman after she's been executed. Like that kind of stuff to me is where I go, you know, do we consider what the long-term existential human costs are to being like too understanding? Does that make sense,
I
Maia?
think this goes to Maya's whole thing about like, and back to the institutions and of like higher learning and how this stuff is like, I was saying like a certain part of America has aligned with a faction that's just like, and you could call it, you know, anti-Semitic of the left or whatever it is, has also aligned with the same people who believe in all the trans rights and trans, you know, any ideology with that, and they've aligned in the same space. And it's weird because you would go, okay, what's the common denominator between all these things then? If you can align with this and align with this, and this is part of the part, it has to be this sort of narcissistic,
we lost Maia.
like selfishness going on.
She'll come back. We'll see. There we go. Just come back in. Did we lose? Did you have a bad connection there? Did we lose you? Can you hear us?
Oh yeah, there's some kind of technological. Can you hear me? Or
Yeah. You got dropped from the broadcast. Can you hear us? Okay.
let's see. You guys are like kind of robotic at the moment. Let's see if
No.
Yeah, you're robotic. Not to say you're the one, but from our end,
Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto.
let's see.
Sometimes if you back out and go back in, it'll refresh.
Yeah, we'll
There
just
we go.
then we'll add back to the broadcast. But you know what I mean? Like the leftists like align themselves with like the goofiest shit, but all of it comes from like complete selfishness, narcissism. It's like, if you're not happy, don't do that. Nothing matters more than your own happiness.
Well,
Nothing matters more than your own this. And like, yeah, but you're killing a kid. Like, it doesn't matter. It's my career or whatever. It's my body,
you know,
my choice.
I'm not
I'm
not a Bible guy. You're more religious than I am.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, there really is there's no better thing to be like, it's full Sodom and Gomorrah over there, of like everything about the id, everything about self-pleasure, everything about self gratification, and with absolutely no, like the I think the poison of the left is like absolutely nothing on their side of going like, what's for the greater good. Like that has become what it is. Like there is no what is for the greater good, and the things that they pitch to us as being,
by the way, that's a commie thing.
For the greater good are just really about enriching themselves in the name of things that are for the greater good.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and this is the flaw with communism across the board, that, you know, it is, let's see if we can get her back. Oh, she jumped out, and then we'll see if she jumps back in. But that's the thing with the communism across the board, is that ultimately it ends up just being about enriching government.
Yeah, it's about usurping power.
Yeah.
And so like people would ask, like, why would California do, you know, undocumented migrant, illegal immigrant fucking housing? and give them zero down housing, and why would they give them this, and why are they giving out this? And the reason is, it was like, do they want to crash the economy? Do they want to, destroy this? And the answer to that is yes, because for two reasons. It's like, one, total and complete control of, like, if we destroy it, obviously we're going to be there to fix it. We're the ones that can come and to the rescue. And like, if you put in policies in place that like literally keep everybody down in this like tyrannical sort of oppression state, then they'll beg for you to just please, all right, just take the foot off our head just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like they'll vote against their own self-interest just to align with this thing. And it's we're at an impasse.
Yeah. Maya, it says you're back audio only. Can you hear us?
We cannot.
Oh, hold on.
We cannot.
Oh, she's got herself muted.
Maya is on mute.
Another option we have is we can have her join us via Spaces. So Maya, if you're hearing this, you can try to join the space, and we might be able to bring you on that way. And you can do video as well with that. So I guess while we have this quick break in the show, a couple things that I wanted to. Oh, there we go. I think she's back. There you are. Are you with us?
Okay.
Yeah, hopefully I just switched to my hotspot in case that's better. Hopefully it is.
Yeah, Mike, it looks like we got a little bit of lag, but we're hearing you at least finally. Can you hear us?
Yeah, let's see if I can. I wonder if maybe it was just a temporary Wi-Fi thing. Let me just try to switch to the regular Wi-Fi and see if it.
All right, we'll see if we can get her.
Now that we have this break.
Yeah, I was going to say, just a real quick heads up, guys. We have now.
Bing, 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 bing.
Well, that was me trying to have you set up a pitch to announce that we have.
That's what I was doing.
Merch for the store. Oh, you're doing a thing while I cue it up.
Is that not the? That's my acapella Seinfeld beat.
Yeah. So if you're watching this, you guys can check out. We have some items in the store now that you can go check out. Big Uglies coffee mugs. We got to turn that image. Yeah. Well, it's just the default image. So you've got the Big Uglies. Yeah, there it is. The Big Uglies mug, which you have show about. This is a show about nothing. The Big Uglies. We also have T-shirts, and obviously, if you thought that this is a racist joke, obviously our black model would not have agreed to do this if it were racist.
Guys,
and you should get that out of your head. Why would you assume that N and exactly the right number of stars to equal the word nothing would mean anything else? Anything other than nothing. So I don't know. I don't know what these people are. They're trying to say that this is an offensive shirt. I don't see it. I think it's a real fun shirt that is an homage to one of our favorite shows of all time. And you can get your you can get a Tim Walz Harris if you want to support official. Yeah, if you want to support the official campaign merchandise for Tim Walz and Kamala Harris, you can get your very own Harris Walz tumbler. And it is the exact font of their campaign. And what's funny about this is that people thought, that if you were to buy this cup, people are thinking, I'm drinking horse jizz. They're not going to get the joke. And it's like, one of our fans brought up a very good point is you don't have to fill it with horse jizz. You can put water or any other kind of cum in there that you like. You're not contractually obligated to fill it with horse jizz. Horse cum. Sicko. You can just enjoy the bit. You can just have your jizz in there. Yeah. But also, if you want to cause some shit at work, maybe show up with that and be like, well, you got a problem with my health regimen? It's a hit on farms. It's a hit on farms. Yeah. That's great. I think we got Maya back finally after our shameless merchandise plug. There we go. That looks better. Are you with us now? Yeah, I'm with you now. Let's hope this works. Yeah. Okay. So where were we? I'm trying to remember. I think you were asking me how are all these ideas connected? Or I was saying that it comes from a sort of, in my opinion, this insane selfishness. This and it's a projection that they make because they're always using the word narcissist. But I think it's the most
selfish, narcissistic thing to think about only your happiness matters. Only what you do is like, I have no other way to explain it. Right. Like, do you feel like it's rooted in this like extreme selfishness or something?
Skills has a theory. We threw it up on the screen. The left's greater good means leveling everything out to the lowest common denominator standard of living and sucking the system dry in the process. Which, by the way, getting sucked dry sounds great on paper, but not when it has to do with the economy.
Yeah, I think that theory holds a lot of weight, and I mean,
you got that fade.
When we look at, when we look at the nature of left-wing anti-Semitism, I think a big underpinning of it is, that these left-wing anti-Semites, or just even, anti-Semitism in general, what it seems to come back to is that you have this very successful minority, and societies don't really know how to deal with that. And the mark of a truly civilized society is a society that is able to tolerate the successful minority. And I think that, the left does not like successful minorities, whether they are Jews or whether they are Black or whether they come from, any group that kind of flies in the face of their idea of like the oppressed, marginalized person of color. That sort of, creates so much cognitive dissonance within them because they believe in this structural oppression. And so
is that why leftists act poor? To pretend they're poor and try and relate to poor, like Trump gets on TV and he was just like, yeah, I'm a fucking billionaire, whatever. Michelle Obama got on TV and said, our children will never have the affirmative action of generational wealth and stuff, while her daughter has a $10 million trust fund. Like this at the DNC, and the whole thing is like trying to appeal to, they try and pretend that they're poor. Like, what is that? Is that part of what you're saying?
Well, I think these things are connected. Like the left basically, in a way, exalts poverty because their arguments, their entire like position is, they're the party of the vulnerable, right? But, and that's historically what they've been doing. However, it seems as if, politicians in general are elite. And it seems like the right wing is sort of fine with that in a way, although Donald Trump, despite being a billionaire, he tries to appeal to the average voter, and
right.
that's what makes him different. So I'd say that there's a certain level of elitism both on the right and on the left, but the left is, I guess, more dishonest about it because they want to virtue signal about, about working class people.
Right. That's what I mean. Like Trump is not pretending he's not a billionaire. Like him making himself relatable to the working man. Like in 2016, I was like, this fucking out of touch cock. Like, what is he fucking? Because I grew up in West Palm Beach, so he's the guy in Palm Beach that sued Palm Beach International Airport and the FAA so that planes wouldn't fly over his golf course in his club members' backswing. He did that. I grew up with thinking this country club cocksucker, like what the fuck? So in 2016, I'm a non-Trump at all. But now, like fast forward to now, I can see him making this relatability to the working people and stuff because he's telling you like, look, I'm rich as fuck. They're not coming for me. Like, so I get that. But literally watching Michelle Obama the other night saying that
it was even with like the Bernie Sanders thing when he was like, we got to text the
millionaires and the billionaires.
And they're like, dude, you got 4 houses like in New Hampshire alone. Yeah. Like, what are you talking about?
That like pretend we're poor shit is different because like Bush owned a baseball team and his dad, like they didn't pretend they were poor. Like, I don't understand it. It's such a fucking goofball shit.
Which, by the way, is just evidence that neither of us have ever been rich. Because we're like, I don't get why you would lie about it. I would tell everybody.
Yeah, maybe that's it. So I've never been there, so I don't have to like lie about it. Like, no, dude, I'm just as poor as you.
Yeah. Right.
So please don't rob me.
Yeah. And by the way, a lot of our trolls are like, you guys are so poor. And we're like, it'd be nice for that not to be true.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if it ever wasn't, I wouldn't be like, you're right, I'm still. As I'm like laying in a fountain in front of my own home, I'm like, that's just pouring nacho cheese over my body.
I was just gonna ask what's in the fountain.
You know what's in the fountain.
Maya, if you had a fountain at your house, what would you put in it? Hawaiian punch?
That's a good question. I guess I'd
Chocolate
go with
syrup?
chocolate. Yeah, why
You got
not?
the chocolate fountain that's like the fondue action.
The blood of Hamas. No.
That too. I mean, that is a totally fine alternative to chocolate. I'd take that any day.
We drink it every morning.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know, dude. Like where I was saying while you were like doing technical difficulty stuff over there, I said to Josh, like, we're at like an impasse. Like there's no, because RFK Jr. is about to endorse Trump, or did endorse Trump, I think, while we were speaking. Do you think there's that much of a divide, and that the left is so far gone? Because you are a detransitioner, you are someone who experienced the vitriol rhetoric from the Israel-Palestine side. Do you think they're so far gone it's irredeemable, or do you think that you were just as hopeful as you were on October 6th still about politics?
Yeah, I think that on October 7th, a lot of fantasies shattered for me, including the trans fantasy, but also the fantasy of peace. I mean, the way I see this is that what we're seeing with the left is it's not uniquely a left problem. It's just that the left seems to value children, teenagers, and young people with underdeveloped prefrontal cortexes as some kind of bastion of the ultimate knowledge. So we're basically prioritizing people with the minds of children who engage in very rigid black and white thinking, and who have all these utopian views of the world. And so I think that, the problem is that the left is putting so much importance on these like college campus protests as some kind of, legitimate political action. It's like you're having a bunch of people who like are in their, late teens and early 20s. The most
privileged places in our society. Yeah.
Right. Dictating your policy. And so I don't think it's a problem that's endemic to the left, certainly, although the left is certainly predisposed to it because of just by virtue of the fact that they value the opinions, and it goes back to the trans stuff. Like, kids know who they are. This tagline, kids know who they are. It's as if kids, emerge from heaven with all of these, like with some kind of special knowledge that the rest of us don't have access to. And right. So it's a flawed premise. And I think that when you let ideological young people dictate your policy platform, you're kind of screwing the country just entirely. And so yeah, that's sort of what I think it comes down to. I mean, it's this youthful kind of optimism and idealism that ends up getting injected with all these sort of queer theory narratives, and it's just kind of a recipe for disaster in my mind.
On that note, what is the worst critical theory? Is it race theory, gender theory, queer theory, or another theory? I don't know about it. Maybe the
or the low end theory, which is from A Tribe Called Quest.
That's the best like rap reference you ever made.
Yeah, well, it's one of the only ones I've got in the chamber. So I used my rap reference on the Maia episode. So you're welcome, Maia. You got my last one in the
at least for this year, until Till's girl tells him another rap song.
Yeah. She's my liaison to all things black people. We joke that she's the ambassador to Black Hollywood. Like, and by the way, like, we'll be watching shows and she goes, "Who's that one?" And I just go like, "I don't know, man. What kind of gotcha is this?
What's his name?"
Yeah, Morris Chestnuts. I'm gonna throw it out there.
He's wrong again.
1 in 5, I get him right, which is I still think pretty good.
So I think that the worst critical theory, well, I think that maybe it's queer theory, because queer theory, I think the tenets of queer theory kind of underpin the rest of the critical theories, because queer theory fundamentally, sees norms as bad. So if something is a norm, it's bad, and it therefore needs to be shattered. And this includes, the norms around racial cohesion and colorblindness, which, like, the thing is that I see all these critical theories as being, they all share this kind of, power structure notion that all of our institutional and interpersonal interactions are based upon this sort of oppressor-oppressed dichotomy. And essentially that, I mean, like, And so any norms that we've established in the West about, treating people with respect regardless of their skin color, something that, by the way, the United States within its very recent history can remember a world in which it was significantly harder for Black people, significantly. And, this country has worked so tirelessly, through legislation and through all kinds of different on the ground efforts to remedy that situation so that Black people can have opportunities. And yet what this critical theory, all of these critical theories, they're all underpinned by the idea of queering expectations. And so if the expectation now is colorblindness and social cohesion, I believe that critical race theory just comes right in and says, no, we've established this norm, but just like all the other norms, we have to throw this one away. We have to queer these expectations. And that includes queering the expectation that there are certain things that are appropriate for children that are not, that aren't, that are objectively not appropriate for children. Like the line between children and adults has also been queered. This queer theory stops at nothing. And what it wants to do is basically, destroy all norms. And one of these norms that I want to go back to in regards to the trans stuff is the norm of medical ethics, the norm of doctors who take an oath to do no harm to their patients, to not cut into a healthy body because that is unnecessary. This norm has now been queered. And so what you end up with is gender medicine in the beginning at least attempted to replicate sex traits that you would see in nature. That was the goal. It was a very binary process. But now but now even the binary trans idea is considered to be, not queer. It's not queer enough. And so now you have non-binary. And because gender medicine is presupposed under, the assumption.
These people.
Yeah.
There's no satisfying these people.
There's no satisfying them because the whole idea of gender medicine is basically if the soul is suffering because of the body, we can cut into the body to liberate the soul. But here's the thing about the soul. The soul is dynamic, right? The soul, it shifts, it morphs, it changes as you get older. You have different priorities in life. I mean, and the soul contains masculine and feminine elements. So there is some truth to this non-binary thing, that the soul is kind of ever changing and that we have, within us masculine and feminine traits. That's just part of the human condition. The problem here, though, is that gender medicine wants to medicalize the soul and enshrine whatever phase the soul is going through into one specific moment through these permanent body alterations that make a healthy body sick. And so, now we're having these increasingly Frankensteinian procedures being offered, such as the no nipple mastectomies and the phallus preserving vaginoplasties. So now this gender medicine isn't even attempting anymore to replicate sex traits that you could find in nature. Now it's going even further to try to embody the soul. Yeah.
Phallus preserving, meaning still have a dick, make a vagina, so having two sex organs. Essentially, yeah. I mean, it's obviously none of these.
This is just greed. This is just greed.
These greedy motherfuckers. They cannot just
imagine. By the way, imagine that. Imagine that trip to the old shop. Okay, first of all, the dick. I'm keeping that.
I'm keeping the dick.
What a non-committal.
Ooh, I love the dick. Just 6 inches above my asshole. Can you put another crater?
Also, why would you put it there? Why would you put it where you would have access to it? This just
right here. Just give me one.
If we're putting them,
can I put a pussy right here? And just every day, I'll just fucking.
Is this where the phrase willy nilly came from?
Just put it anywhere.
Yeah,
dude, I didn't know that was a thing, Maya. There's people that's what it's called, phallus preserving vaginal surgery, or
yes, it's phallus preserving vaginoplasty, and they also have for the females, you can get this phalloplasty, which is basically where they take some skin, usually from your forearm. They also from
we've seen that the old Chipotle burrito.
Right, so they turn it into they basically fold it over and stitch it to the crotch area, and so but what you can do now actually is get the arm sausage stitched to your groin while also keeping the vaginal canal open, So basically, these procedures are becoming increasingly more Frankensteinian because the entire premise of this field is to basically, to align the soul with the body. And so, if you have this masculine and feminine soul that's constantly shifting, and your soul is like ever changing, then gender medicine says, look, if somebody says I want, this to immortalize this kind of non-binary identity within my body, gender medicine, instead of being like a legitimate medical field that's like, whoa, hold on a second. Gender medicine says, if you want the phallus-preserving vaginoplasty, then you get the phallus-preserving vaginoplasty because that is, the ultimate expression of your soul. That is essentially what this entire medical field is doing.
From the medical standpoint,
gender medicine has just become Kanye West's ambition. Like, I want to fix homelessness overnight with a house built for every person in 24 hours. And you're like, that's nice in theory, but there are limitations to what we can do. And then my question for you, Maya, is these penises way too big, right? Like, you got a thought on that? Like, I mean, are we not looking at these things going, yo, size queen, maybe start with like a bit of elbow skin? Why are you going with the take my thigh?
Well, it's, they often, so the phalloplasty is a surgery it's actually multiple surgeries. And so, they'll basically, oftentimes they realize that it's too bulky. They'll often realize that the neophallus is too bulky, and so there'll be like a debulking procedure done. And so, because it's just,
trying to fit that sleeping bag back in the sleeve ain't gonna happen, dude.
Imagine try. It's like getting home with this thick hog and being like, I didn't even think about pants, dude. This is a problem.
Yeah, it does end up being quite a big problem. I mean, it ends up being pretty.
Me, dude. I've never had that problem. I've never been like, well, my penis is a problem for this outfit. Never.
So I got to try on the You got to try on the pants. That's why they have fitting rooms.
Nope, I'm all set. Never been like, there's not a.
I love how you're just like, I know my size. This is like, nah, because sometimes I could get the similar type of thing, but jeans, for example, if the cut is different, I'm like, dude, this is
never been a problem for me.
It's like a small hotel, there's no ballroom, and there's such a dad joke. I apologize. But there is a thing to this, right? That I know we're joking about, wow, they didn't even think about pants, but like, is that kind of their problem? Is they don't think long term, that all of this is short term, short-sighted, like satisfy my endorphins happiness right now. And that's like like you said, when it goes to like the suicidal kid and you're like, why is the kid suicidal? Not like, hey, let's affirm them. Let's get to the root of that. Like, this short-sighted bullshit, like nobody is even addressing. Like, there's no long-term studies, there's no long-term, and they don't even think about pants or that the big dick they just picked would fit. There's no even long-term thought of that. Like,
yeah, it's all about satisfying the short term. And the truth is that to go back to the question of why this is happening to kids in the first place, this gender medicine stuff is precisely because, so the one kind of closest thing that we have to a long-term study would be the Dutch studies. So the Dutch protocol is really the pioneer of pediatric gender medicine, and what they realized. So they had these adult patients they were transitioning. And, they basically came to the conclusion that, like, okay, these people are suffering because they have like the wrong body. They have the right brain in the wrong body. And so in order to remedy this situation, we need to like surgically and chemically alter the body to make it appear closer to the opposite sex. And this will bring the body and mind into alignment. And they did this because they believed in this concept of the gender identity, right? They believe that everybody has a gender identity, which is somebody's own kind of internal perception of what their sex is, and that sometimes this gender identity...
Isn't that just your fucking brain or your soul or whatever else, like intuition, your instinct, all that? That's what they're trying to address? They're saying that's your gender identity? That voice inside your head?
So here's the thing, is that man and woman aren't feelings. Nobody can feel like a man or feel like a woman. Like, men and women just are, they just exist. There are a variety of different types of men and women. It's not a feeling. So when you ask a bunch of kids and teenagers, well, do you feel like a boy or feel like a girl? They'll obviously say no, because that's not a feeling. It's just a thing that exists. It's like saying, do you feel like a human? It's like, well, what does that even mean? Humans feel a bunch of different ways. We're all human. It's a biological state. It's not a feeling. And so with these gender doctors, they basically did these experiments on adults upon the premise that there is this gender identity mismatch, or even basically they never even tested whether or not gender identity exists. I mean, you can't find it in the brain. It's totally a belief system. And so they found, once they did these interventions on adults, that actually, the adult outcome, so the Dutch researchers were actually very sober about their findings, and they said, look, in the short term, these people there's this kind of honeymoon period of transition. But as they've, completed the surgical and hormonal steps of the transition, after a certain point in time, you have all these people who are very obsessive, that are fixating on getting to the next step. They think they're sold this idea, and they think this is going to solve my problems. And so
it's like they have a compulsive disorder that's obsessive.
It's identity OCD. That's essentially what it is.
OCD, right? Like, and that's that's what I mean. Like clinically, when they say that this.
Well, that's kind of what Maia was talking about with the comorbidities, is like, so this would be a good example of this is more of a compulsion disorder than necessarily a gender identity thing.
Yeah, but specifically, how is it that the very same political party who's every day telling us that mental health is the most important thing, and don't go into a job unless you have the perfect work-life balance, and mental health this, and we really need to normalize this about mental health, they refuse to address the mental illness that is in transgenderism. Like flat out deny that it could be mental illness. Like, how do they make these cognitive rationalizations? Like, it's like, so that's what you'd be studying, huh?
So I think that there are reasons for that. I mean, there are problems with social emotional learning and basically forcing kids to constantly ruminate about their negative emotions. Like, there seems to be this thing happening in the United States and really across the West, which is basically just, robbing kids of any opportunity to become resilient. Like, now kids don't even play outside with other kids anymore. Either like you have the helicopter parents who are shuttling them between different extracurriculars, and so the kids never have unstructured time in which they're forced to entertain themselves, or you just have a bunch of parents who are kind of laid back and let the iPad or the phone raise their toddler. And so kids don't have the chance to, overcome these negative emotions that are just a part of the normal human condition. And then when they hit puberty, especially girls, like we know that adolescent females have, this onslaught of negative emotions that come as the result of puberty, because they start to, wake up to the fact that they are like sexual, like in terms of sexual dimorphism, the more vulnerable sex. That now they're going from a child's body to a woman's body, but they're still children mentally, and then they're being leered at by men and by boys in their class. And so they of course they want to escape that. And there's this highly pornified culture that's, making girls think, well, I don't want to be a sex object, so therefore I'm not a girl. And so, you have a lot of things going on here.
I just had not really like an epiphany, but like, that's like why they're hell-bent on these puberty blockers and stuff, right? To be like, being a girl for me was so hard growing up, and I don't want that for my kid. Like you said, helicopter parents and sort of like this. How much was like this over-parenting of like, I don't want them going through that lived experience that I had, but there's this new technology that's out that they won't even have to. And they're like sheltering them from, like you said, being resilient, or even going through something natural.
And there also could be like a Peter Pan element to this for some parents.
I was laughing earlier, like so in the shadow.
No, but like to try to preserve their children as in the most childlike state possible for as long as possible. I mean, that's not something we're even considering, but
pedophiles do.
But this came up on the space that Maia and I did on Sunday about like there are now these cases where there's like this Munchausen's by proxy transing that's happening with parents that are trying to force this in onto their children, that maybe the child isn't like the one that's organically generating the interest in the idea.
Right. And it's like, how much of it is that parent? Like how much, like every time I see one of those kids, there was always a mom.
Well, this is totally anecdotal, but I just remember this one time it was for Netta's birthday a couple years ago. I took her to this like diner we've been wanting to go to. It's like a historic diner over in Eagle Rock, Cindy's. It's in like a bunch of movies and stuff. And we were sitting there and there was this woman, like total leftist hippie woman there with her young son who was like 3 or 4. And you could hear her like trying to convince him that he would be happier wearing girls' clothes at school. And he was like, he's like coloring. He's like eating chicken tenders. He's not about it. He doesn't care. And she's like, well, like did you ever think maybe that you would feel more yourself if you wore girls' clothing? And he's like, no, I don't know. I mean, like I like some of their shoes and stuff, but like, I don't know, like if that's for me. And she goes, well, I think, like, she's literally like shoving this down his throat while we're sitting there. And I remember her like kicking me under the table, my girlfriend, and being like, are you listening to this? Like, do we call somebody?
That shit is
like,
crazy,
it's
dude.
That's
the Charlize Theron, Dwayne Wade, every fucking celebrity out here that does it. And they're like, they're transing their kids. And the left will go, well, that's fucking insane. You can't trans a kid. They're born that way. And you go, no, it's 100% a fucking ideology. That's why there's queer theory and gender theory and all this. It's not a real thing.
Well, it's also how Bill Maher said why is it so regional? Like, why do you go to Mississippi and you might find like one family at a dinner or a barbecue that has a trans kid or a gay kid? You go to LA and you'll be hard pressed to find one
normal kid,
like not, kid who doesn't identify as some part of the LGBTQ,
and it's a fad for these parents too. If they have dork ass kids that aren't into sports or this, they have a new club they can belong to. If they didn't have to compete in either, it's not music that they have to beat out another musician for. It's not dance that they have to beat another dancer out for. It's not bowling. It's not archery. It's not football. It's nothing. They don't have to compete to be part of the thing. And so like now I hear you. What we need are transgender beauty pageants for children. I'm with you. So we need that's what you hit is we need a competition reality show. As soon as they compete, they'll find out like maybe I'll just have my kid be regular. Yeah. We'll just put them to the test. If you can't beat out these other fucking trans kids, maybe you should just be regular. Because this is for the elite.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they just talk about like, oh, we don't have the money. It's like the real kids beauty pageant shows where like we just ain't got the money to compete with them rich folks.
We just can't do it.
They get the hair done every day.
Well, sweetie, you're just gonna have to compete next year as the boy then.
They're just trying to set it up. I mean, we're laughing, but Maya, you got to feel like we're probably pretty close to having stuff like this in the United States.
I mean, I really hope we don't get there, because
we'll sponsor it.
Well, I think so there are a few things that are sort of important to note, which is I want to finish the point about like why we started transing kids. It's because these Dutch researchers saw that after the honeymoon period wore off, like and sometimes even the honeymoon period was sometimes even very short. Some patients would express regret immediately. And either way, like the functional outcomes for these adults were actually very low. Like these adults, they found it hard they weren't very employable, and a lot of their kind of life, like functional life outcomes went down. And the Dutch researchers, instead of thinking, wait a second, did we go wrong with transitioning the adults? What they actually said was, the reason why these patients are faring so poorly is because they've gone through male puberty, so they can't pass as women, because the entire treatment protocol is based upon, aesthetic appearance of things. And so they got this idea, which was like, what if we can, if there are these transsexual adults and we've talked to them and they said, I've known this about myself since I was 4, which is like try to trust, somebody's kind of retrospective reasoning in that regard. Because people who want to, figure out how is it that I ended up in this gender clinic and then I ended up having my genitals removed and rearranged, like what got me here. Of course, people are going to be looking back into their past to try to find, some justification. And the truth is that a lot of adult homosexuals as children were very gender nonconforming. And before we medicalized these kids under the watchful waiting protocol, when it was like a non-social and non-medical intervention, we saw that about 80% of these kids routinely would grow out of their sort of cross-sex identification, and the vast majority of those who grew out of it they grew up to be, gay, lesbian, or bisexual. And so it turns out that actually this early onset child gender nonconformity, is much more likely to result in a homosexual future outcome, not always, but often enough to the point where it's notable clinically, than it is to, generate an outcome of like some kind of adult transsexual outcome. And so
Wow.
when we look at these adults, so really, like, if you want to debate liberals on this, you need to read up on Ken Zucker, who is the researcher who did these like watchful waiting studies, and you have to tell them, like, look, this isn't gay 2.0. This just objectively isn't. Like, gay people
Right.
didn't want to remove their body parts for being gay. They didn't need somebody to like disbelieve their eyes and ears. They didn't like make these false metaphysical claims that force society to fundamentally restructure itself, for this minority of people. Like it's not gay 2.0. And in fact, this whole
It's gay conversion therapy.
it is. It's absolutely, it's the ultimate
Gay conversion therapy. It's actually, and Josh actually has a fantastic joke about this in his special, Goliath. You can go watch it. Where he talks about like the Middle East would be absolutely in support of this, because it was like, dude, we throw gays off buildings here and you guys are just transing it. That's fine. We could deal with that. Oh, you live as a woman now? That's fine.
Well, they actually do it in Iran. Like there are places in the Middle East where their answer to homosexuality is sex reassignment surgery, almost as like a form of coercive punishment.
Yeah. And because it involves genital mutilation, they don't care, because it involves those things. I just before we wrap this up, I just want to ask you, Maia, have you done a deep dive into the money of this in this whole medical industrial complex that is that? Because I have a degree in business healthcare admin, and I didn't want to be a hospital administrator, sorry, but I will say this, and I know that when it comes to surgeons and when it comes to actual so I had back surgery during the pandemic, and a friend of mine works for a spinal medical device sale company, and she was like, listen, if they tell you you're going to need some surgery and we want to put and fusion and use the spine and stuff, it's just like, don't do it. No matter what, a surgeon, I was like, yeah, but the surgeon said I need XYZ, and she was like, a surgeon is always going to say you need surgery because his job is surgery, right? He doesn't get paid more for not doing surgeries. And I was like, it was the biggest fucking light bulb that I was like, oh, duh. Like, why the fuck am I even So when these people are like, hey, can you cut my dick off? Can you sew a dick on? Like, these gender surgeons are like, yeah, dude, we can fucking do it. Here, where's my gloves? I can do whatever the fuck you want, because Medicare and this system that's in here is just gonna pay me.
I don't know if you know this, but we can do both. You want both? I'll give you both.
I'm actually really curious, and not just because my degree was in that, and I'm a nerd about those things, but I am really curious about the amount of money that they would get back from DRGs and actually the compensation that hospitals, if they go, if you treated X amount of trans kids and gave out these trans surgeries, it's the same with the COVID vaccine. They awarded hospitals for through PPOs and HMOs and stuff. They awarded hospitals specifically, money and doctors for a certain amount of shots that they gave out. And so if you gave out a certain amount of vaccine, it was $30,000 for a certain amount each time. So they were like, hey, we're the most vaccinated hospital there is. I'm curious to know how much fucking money these people are making, because there's no way they believe this shit. There's no way they believe this without the end goal in mind, be like, how much money are we making? So I'm curious if you know any of the numbers.
Yeah, and also real quick, Maia, before you reply, we had a tech issue with the space. We did this wrong. We should have had you join via the space so that the people in the space could hear you. That's why no one's in the space. So but we'll wrap with this chunk, and I definitely want to hear what your thoughts are on that. Sorry.
Yeah. So what we do know about the cost of these like procedures is, and particularly why, these medical institutions want to get the kids young, is because, of course, if you put a kid on puberty blockers, and 99% of the kids who are put on puberty blockers go on to cross-sex hormones, whereas before these kids were medicalized, 80% of them just grew out of it and didn't seek transition as adults. But anyways, you put them on
That
puberty
pill money.
blockers, 99% of them go on to cross-sex hormones. So these kids are sterile, they have a bunch of health problems, and they can't produce their own hormones. So just from the puberty blockers and, the estimated
Those are
lifetime medical
customers for life.
costs, and here's what's crazy, just the costs of like the, pubertal suppression and the cost of hormone replacement therapy, and this is excluding surgeries, is estimated to be at about $1 million per child.
Get
And
the
that's
fuck
before the
outta here.
surgeries. A lifetime payment so far of $1 million per child, because they're going to need all those hormones for the rest of their life. And that is before any surgical interventions.
That's
So this is a
fucking
massive cash cow.
insane. That's what needs to be talked about, because people are like going crazy about big pharma and how much money they can make, and they need to lower prescription drug prices. And be like, dude, they're making your kid a customer for life. Like there are, and that's why a lot of like when it comes to like therapy or something, and like putting these kids on pills and stuff, I'm like, how much of it is like kids just being kids, and how much of it is just like, where is this medical intervention? Like, at what point is there like, there needs to be some sort of, as much as I don't want the government to intervene and make new laws and expand their powers, there has to be some sort of intervention at some point, where we cannot keep having a funnel system to big pharma for like these kids just because. And that's my problem with living in California, where Gavin Newsom, our governor, is trying to make this whole, we're affirm your kid's gender, and if you disagree with it, they can go behind your back and seek health care like without parental consent.
Well, and the argument that the trans people made on Sunday's space that we were in was like, well, that hasn't happened yet. And it's like, yeah, but that is
but
what
they're trying to.
They are angling.
It is a
that.
bill. It's not a law. It's a bill, which means somebody wrote it down and submitted it to our fucking state assembly. Like, that's like, what, somebody wrote it up.
Yeah, and what I thought was so interesting about that part of the debate was, they were like, well, Newsom hasn't submitted any or written any legislation. It's like, yeah, but he has approved,
championed it.
Yeah, like, yeah,
he's talked about it.
Yeah, and by the way, like anything preliminary, he's been like, I'm all for it.
Yeah. And I think it's long overdue. Really. And if we look at what's going, and you're like, this fucking scumbag.
Yeah, he's really, really bad.
Maya, you're an awesome guest. We appreciate you being here. Thank you for sharing your story and your perspective and definite knowledge, because we're morons. No,
that's not true. You just aren't as sort of seeped in this one specific issue.
Well, we identify as morons.
Yeah.
So I would
who are you to tell us that we ain't what we identify
our
as?
Our pronouns are dumb and dicks.
Oh, sorry, my bad for not respecting your unfactual identity claims.
Identities, yeah. Hello,
Maya. Do you have anything? I mean, we could go on for hours with you. You're such a joy to talk to. Do you have anything coming up that you want to plug or promote, or any other content or things that you're doing where people can come, listen to you speak and hear what you have to say on all this stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm very open for, if anybody needs a speaker to talk about any of these issues, if anybody needs a speaker, hit me up on X. And I have a YouTube channel, which is at Maia Poet. I'm on X, you can see on the banner what my handle is. And right now, there's this really fantastic parent resource. I think it's really important for any parent who has a kid in schools, whether they're public schools or private schools, in any Anglophone country, because we know this is afflicting the Anglophone West primarily. There's a really good resource for parents that breaks all of this stuff that I talked about down into like something that the average person can understand and use to protect their kids. It's a really good resource from Restore Childhood. And they're on X, and it's called the Gender Toolkit. So if you follow me on X, I'll gladly send you that resource. And I think it's free for download, and it's just a fantastic guide for parents that I think really every parent has, like, nobody has an excuse to not download it. I mean, there's this scourge that's being pushed on your kids in school that's aiming to create a lifelong medical patient out of your healthy, normal child who might just be a bit quirky, and to try to weaponize their kind of child's, immature sort of self-hatred and kind of permanently enshrine it into their body. And so you can't let them do that. And I think this resource, just hit me up on X and I'll gladly send it to you because it's invaluable. But I'm
awesome,
around.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. And we'll have you back on anytime if you have anything you want to plug or promote or tell people about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And also, I just did an interview with Chloe Cole, who's a good friend of mine, and she's a pretty prominent detransitioner. So on her page, we did an interview together. And so if you want to get a better kind of understanding of my story and just hear kind of, us talking about it from the perspective of friends who have had, our own, mystical gender journeys, you can check that out on Chloe Cole's X page. So there's also that.
We'll link that in the description of the show when we post it on all of our channels.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you, Maia.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
All right. Don't die over there.
Shit.
Jesus. Yeah. So we drastically fucked this up. I had no idea that when we bring the feed import, the audio doesn't kick back as well. So her video doesn't. No. Her video doesn't kick back to the space, nor does the audio. So people in the space couldn't even hear her talking. They could just hear us. Yeah. So we just have
in the future we'll have them go in through the space,
and then
we'll
import
live
the space into the thing. Yeah, that's how we have to do it. So we're dumb.
Live and learn. I told her we were morons.
Great. Yeah. Listen. Proof of purchase.
It's like
really, thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. I do like the comments we got.
Comments at the end.
Skills, thanks are good. You said this is great. More guests could be great. Yeah, I agree. I think, bringing in people who have, and by the way, like, not to get too in the weeds, but Carl and I are both great second and third chairs. So anytime we can get a guest in who can kind of steer the ship for us so we can just be dumb and funny is our favorite. And it always, doing it that way feels like lazy podcasting, but if you guys like it, believe me, we love it. So.
I don't think it was lazy. I felt like I was steering conversation.
Yeah, no, you did a great job. Morgan, sad I missed most of this. Yeah, well,
that's what happens.
Show up. So we did.
Morgan, what were you watching? RFK or some shit important?
Yeah.
Look.
Yeah, you got anything going on before we get out of here? By the way, somebody earlier said I have an important thing or they were like, I have a perspective on this, but I'm a troll, so Josh won't let it in. Hey, post it. Just post it.
Yeah, take it.
If you got, I can know you're a troll, but if you have, listen, I think I'm pretty fair. If people post things that we've said this a million times, if you're a troll, if you post something funny, we will share it. Yeah. If you post something insightful, we will share it. We can also still be like, you're still a faggot, but at the end of the day,
bro, clock's right twice a day.
Yeah, dude. If you got something good, put it in. We'll share it. If it's good, we'll put it in.
The most hilarious thing is the faggot Red Bar fans who come in like Red Bar's watching. Give it a year. All those fags.
Yeah.
Dude, they've trolled for so long, they're fans now.
Yeah.
That they're like, I know I'm a troll, but I'm trying to get on the show. And you're like, dude,
you guys, I've been watching 3 hours of this, and you guys fucking suck.
I mean, you guys fucking suck. I've been watching all day, but you guys stink, and I hate the way you interview, even though the last one was really good and you had some great questions. I fucking hate you fucking guys, but also at the same time, can I get on the show? Please.
Yeah, so guys, follow us on. Thank you for watching the show. Follow us on X or Patreon. You can jump in, support us on Patreon. It helps keeps the lights of this place on for sure.
Bing bong,
which we appreciate. And follow Mr. Big Spit on X, Josh Denny on X, and we'll be back with you guys again next Friday. Oh, I do want to play this.
Remember, don't play the laughing boy. There are only two things I can't stand in this world: people who are intolerant of other people's cultures and the Dutch.
What?